was an absolute pleasure for me to make this film because, well, frankly, I knew very little about the French in Newfoundland, the history of the French in Newfoundland. And so that's always great when you can start on a subject you know very little about. And as a filmmaker, it was we had the visual thread, which was a 300-foot tapestry created by Jean-Claude Roy and Christine Roy in France, and embroidered by 12 women from a small community of Conch on the French shore in Newfoundland. And it is an extraordinary record of the history that up until now very few knew anything about, and there was very little evidence of, except a few phantoms on the shore. The French have long since left our province, our shores, but now we have a record of their time here that we can now share with the entire world. The biggest surprise for me in making this documentary was to discover, because I was making the documentary in French, was to discover that nobody on the French shore of Newfoundland spoke French. So that was a challenge. And the reason they didn't speak French, which is what I didn't know, was that the French fishermen were not allowed to settle in Newfoundland. They were not allowed to build houses. They were not allowed to marry. And since language is usually transmitted through the mother over a period of time in a family and school setting, there was little opportunity to establish the French language nor the French culture. By law, the French fishermen were permitted to fish here during 6 months of the year. At the end of that time, they would have to go back to France with their boats full of cod, salted cod, and leave their premises and their gear with what they call the guardians. Those were the Irish people on the northern peninsula, and they would look after the goods till the next season. The tapestry portrays beautifully the importance of the cod fishery in the world economy. Cod was feeding the world, and it was so important that when the French had control by law of the French shore, the English were always coming and fighting to take possession, because they knew how lucrative the cod was and they wanted some. And the French fought them off, but eventually the French lost their right to fish on the French shore. And now, in communities like Conch and other communities around Newfoundland, there's very little cod fishing happening. But when it was in progress, the cod was feeding the world, and that's the story the tapestry tells.